So now we'll move on to the second speaker, Dr. Alexis Lycas, who is Associate Professor at École Pratique des Hautes Études, and his topic is on Dunhuang Geographical Documents, Knowledge Production and Local History during the Tang. Please welcome Professor Lycas.
Okay. Before I start, I would like to thank Melody Doumi and her team for inviting me and for the perfect logistics. Now, please have a look at this beautiful illustration, because it is, to my limited knowledge, probably the only Dunhuang manuscript with an actual figurative description of space or landscape. Everything else we have is text, and this text will be the focus of my talk, but I do think they are worth it. So I'm a social and cultural historian of early medieval China, and I work with geographical documents, trying to understand what these objects tell us of the places and people they describe, but also of the people who produce them. To put it differently, I'm not as much interested in historical geography than I am in the history of geography. My initial research was on the Six Dynasties period, but I have shifted my attention to the Tang since 2017. I try to understand the Tang Empire from its geographical margins, be they in the southwest with the Tibeto-Burman Nanzhao Kingdom, or in the west in and around Dunhuang. To do so, I rely on descriptions produced by geographers or literati who describe the world according to its spatial configurations. In their current state, none of these descriptions contain maps or illustrations. Visual representations were produced, but none have survived, apart from some Dunhuang murals and a Sino-Tibetan map now in Japan. One must therefore rely on ordinary geographical writings to understand local societies and the logistics of empire at its borders. Such writings became, during the second millennium of the Chinese Empire, the main genre for our understanding of Chinese local history and geography, namely local gazetteers. My research can therefore be taken as a small contribution to an archaeology of the genre. As it happens, Dunhuang has, among other wonders, yielded 9 geographical manuscripts produced by various and mostly unknown individuals between the 7th and the 10th century. These manuscripts all deal with various aspects of Dunhuang local geography and provide invaluable information on the medieval production, circulation, and usage of technical documents in a distant region. The results of my research on this topic will appear, hopefully before next spring, in the form of this book. It is unfortunately written in French, but it will be, more fortunately, available freely online. I've added a subtitle in red because it does not appear on the cover. And for those of you who wonder, the Tibetan script on the bottom right of the image says, according to Jacob Dalton, quoted by Robert Scharf, teaching house and samga, or community, residence. The list of these 9 local geographical manuscripts shown here is organized chronologically, with the first 4 documents dating to the 7th and 8th century, the next 2 to the 9th century, and the last 3 to the 10th. They also belong to different subgenres of geographical writings. They appear here in red. 7 of these manuscripts are fragmentary, which means one must resort to limited comparisons and is often left to imagine at best what information could be found originally. However fragmentary, they are very helpful to help us first understand how historical actors perceived and represented the world. This is the cultural history of geographical knowledge aspect of my research. And second, how society worked at the local level. This is the social history aspect of it. They also contain factual elements unknown in transmitted sources, such as the existence of an ink pond, auspicious omens, a lengthy folk song, and crucial information on the Sogdian colonies, as well as accounts on Zoroastrian rituals. The following slides will consist in a chronological and historiographical overview of modern studies on Dunhuang Geographical documents, all of which produced by very well-dressed scholars. In red are the manuscripts on which these scholars have provided groundbreaking work, whether by transcribing them or by writing important studies. To be sure, all these documents are familiar to Dunhuang specialists, and they have already been studied, but exclusively from the point of view of historical geography, an important field, but one that focuses on an antiquarian interest towards East and Central Asian history. Right after Paul Pelliot carefully chose the documents he then bought from Wang Yuanlu in 1908, he showed them to Luo Zhenyu in Beijing before returning to France, and Luo copied some of them, including the most complete of this geographical manuscript, now known as Pelliot Chinois 2005. In 1916, Pelliot published an important article on the Sogdian colonies, which somehow, ironically, made more use of the Stein documents, especially of Stein 367. About the same time, Lionel Giles produced the first complete translations and studies of these three Stein manuscripts, minus Stein 2593. In the early 40s, the great scholar Xiang Da traveled to Dunhuang and, among other important studies, transcribed the Shouchangxian Di Jing, the only privately held manuscript of the corpus which is now lost. As usual in any field of Chinese history, Japanese scholarship contributed greatly, first with Haneda Toru and Morishi Kazo, and later with Dunhuang study specialist Ikeda On, who published the most accurate transcription of these three important tujing, or illustrated guidelines. In China, the 80s and 90s witnessed a sudden burst in the study of these documents, with the three musketeers of geography, Zheng Binglin, Wang Zhongluo, and Li Zhengyu, to which we should add the younger D'Artagnan or Zhong Xinjiang. Among them, the greatest specialist is Li Zhengyu, as he traveled extensively to identify each place mentioned in these documents. Last but not least, another towering figure of Dunhuang studies has done some unpublished work on these manuscripts, especially on Pelliot 2005, which has been the main focus of Sun Yingying's excellent 2017 PhD dissertation, as well as an object of inquiry for Arnaud's own PhD, also defended in 2017. Now, I will try to illustrate the two main conclusions that I have come to after reading and translating these documents. One has to do with standardization of geographical practices, and I will come to it later. The other one has to do with the typological variety of these geographical documents, which I turn to now. It is usually assumed that medieval local writings evolved from Tang-era illustrated guidelines, or tujing, to Song Dynasty local gazetteers, or difangzhi. Dunhuang documents actually show a more complex image, with the coexistence of at least 4 identified genres that were employed before the Song. Besides tujing, we can find examples of tuzhi, or illustrated treatises, tujing and dijing, or topographies, as well as records or lu. One way to substantiate my claim of a typological variety would be to show you lengthy philological explanations of textual variety among manuscripts. Instead, I would like to show you illustrations, but of modern schematic maps that I have drawn for the purpose of the book. I must apologize once more for the fact that the information is written in French, but I don't think it will be too much of a problem to understand the point I'm trying to make here. I have drawn these maps by taking data exclusively from these 9 manuscripts. By layering these maps, my idea here is to visualize how a given area can be depicted differently in manuscripts according to the genre they belong to. They show, among other things, how the type of information we can find in one subgenre is quite different from another. So the first 3 maps show the temporal and typological evolution of the description of Shouchang County from an 8th century illustrated guidelines, manuscript Pelliot 5034, to a 9th century illustrated treatise, Stein 367, and ultimately to a 10th century topography, the Shouchangxian Di Jing. So the first, this one, is clearly the most complete it provides numerous details on administrative offices and religious buildings, while also informing us on elements that used to be there but had been destroyed by the 8th century. These are the dotted parts. Epistemologically speaking, this makes sense, as manuscripts belonging to the genre of illustrated guidelines, or tujing, had to be as complete as possible. Moving on to Stein 367, we can see a clear reduction in the amount of information that is given to the reader. Apart from the administrative seat, the manuscript provides us with data on the gullies, canals, sources, and lakes surrounding Shouchang. The content of Stein 367 proves to be coherent with that of the only surviving statewide illustrated treatise, namely the Yuanhe Junxian Tuzhi, or illustrated treatise of the commanderies and counties of the Yuanhe era, produced at the beginning of the 9th century by compiling local documents such as manuscript Stein 367. The information provided by the Shouchangxian Dijing is also more reduced than that of Pelliot 5034 and as condensed as that of Stein 367, although its information does not exactly overlap with that of Stein 367, which we have just seen. This is partly due to the fact that they do not belong to the same genre. One is a treatise and the other a topography, but also to the fact that the local topography changed from the 9th to the 10th century. One canal has disappeared, while the swamp has re-emerged and a walled city was created. That being said, these last two documents have much more in common, obviously, than they do with the first one. The second set of maps uses the same three manuscripts, but deals with the area of the so-called Sogdian colonies, west of Dunhuang, south of the Taklamakan Desert, and beyond the Lop Nor. Despite being hundreds of kilometers away from the seat of Shouchang County, these cities belong to it. Since the natural elements are roughly the same from one document to another, I'll focus here on the location of some of these Sogdian colonies. The richer Pelliot 5034 provides, contrary to the other two manuscripts, information on the roads that link these settlements to each other, but my interest here is the location of Puthaochang, or Grapevine City. As you can see here, it is not located along the main line of the third road, which stretches from Tuncheng to Boxian, but further south, on the southern part of the Nanshan, or Southern Mountain Range. On top of that, it is located in between two previous locations of the site, which are now in ruin. Moving to the following and later maps, we can see here with Stein 367 that roads are absent, and that Puthaocheng now appears north of Shouchang, or Stone City, which was clearly the urban hub of the region. At least this is how it is described in the documents, which present every other city in relation to Shouchang. A century later, the Shouchangxian Dijing presents exactly the same locations as Stein 367, but differs in the naming of some of these sites. Two things I find interesting here. First, the insistence shared by most manuscripts on identifying past locations, even when these are hard to find for the very historical actors who were supposed to use these documents. Second, that the discrepancy among manuscripts has led scholars to correct some of these locations. For instance, that of Puthaocheng in Pelliot 5034, without considering the possibility that some of these sites might have been rebuilt or relocated over time. The last set of maps is based on two Buddhist manuscripts from the 10th century. The first is Pelliot 2691, a religious and most certainly Buddhist topography that bears striking resemblance in its content with the early medieval Christian topographies of the Holy Land. This map is centered around Dunhuang, and its most striking feature is the systematic naming of most of the orographic and hydrographic elements that one, for instance, a pilgrim, may find on one's way to the Western lands. Although it is also regarded as a Buddhist record, Stein 5448, whose title is Dunhuang Lu, or Records of Dunhuang, displays a much less crowded map of the same area. It's because its focus is on Dunhuang, and more specifically on the Mogao cave complex, for which it provides a wealth of details. These few examples show quite clearly that although these geographical documents are local in scope and were produced with the common intention of providing useful information to navigate this space, the nature of the information varied greatly, and so did the usage that could be made of it. Moving on to the last part of my presentation, I would like to focus on questions regarding the standardization of geographical practices. To do so, I would show you two examples which attest to the high degree of codification in the production of geographical knowledge before the Song dynasty. The first example is a positive or obvious one, and it concerns the material layout of the manuscripts. As you can see in this example, taken from Pelliot 2005, the information is visually hierarchized, just like the headings we all use in a Word document. The main entries are placed on the highest level, below the top margin of the paper scroll. The second level entries are placed one notch below, and the entry itself starts another notch below. Such a presentation helps the user to easily access the information he's looking for without having to read the entire scroll. Intertextual relations within this set of manuscripts confirms the high degree of standardization. Certain entries are reused from one manuscript to another, sometimes with more, sometimes with less information, because remember, these documents belong to various subgenres, but share nonetheless a common structure from which they can select practical, useful, reliable, and easily accessible knowledge. The last citation shown on this slide is a comment made by the scribe regarding the 5 columns placed on the right side of the manuscript. They display 19 headings separated by a blank space, which a regular user of illustrated guidelines would expect to find when unrolling such a document. Here, these headings are devoid of any content because the elements that would usually fit in here, such as an imperial palace or a description of the Yellow River, do not occur in a frontier area like Dunhuang. The scribe, or the person who ordered him to copy this manuscript, decided nonetheless that mentioning them was necessary because these documents followed a strong structure. Standardizing practices can thus be grasped through the tension that occurs between the ordinary routine of knowledge production and scattered elements containing out of the ordinary details. In relation with these empty headings we've just seen, the last examples of the codification of geographical knowledge during the Tang dynasty might seem counterintuitive at first. They concern traces and clues of codified knowledge, or to put it differently, the solutions found by historical actors to deal with the expected or unexpected absence of geographical information. On the top left, manuscript Stein 788 shows numerous tian, or a character used to mark missing elements regarding a given place. On the bottom right, the line taken from Pelliot 2691, the religious topography I mentioned before, is evidence of the existence of a known and certainly well-defined set of documents one could turn to. The authors of these specific documents knew they lacked information on certain topics, but also knew that their users knew or should have known about these other genres. Together with the previous examples, these last two citations are important for the history of medieval geography because they confirm how codified geographical knowledge was while testifying to the existing variety of identified subgenres in pre-Song geographical writings. Thank you very much.